The bees are the maddest lads in the land, known for infamous things like the Hive, the growth of the Great Tree, and RoboGreg, and even some parts of the under-construct Ice Express. These bees have existed in Gooberia for quite a while and have become quite the icon. The flag of Gooberia has an emblem symbolized by the bees, seen by its yellow and black on the flag. From the humble beginnings of a ragtag group of bees from around the world to a high-class group of scholars today, this is the story of the bees and the hive. We begin in the humble beginnings just before the foundation of Gooberia. A lot of the bees live in their own tiny hives, just doing their thing, making honey, and just going through the bee equivalent of osmosis. Thought that their work was kinda cringe and thought there just had to be another way of living. What is life even if you're not having fun? One day, a man named Gooberia, also known as Grant, founded Gooberia on the side of a mountain by a mystical river, and one bee thought it was pretty cool, and that bee was Honey Joestar. And he went out and spread the news to many bees around the world, like a Jehovah's Witness coming to your door and spreading the word. An unusual team of bees formed and they assembled into the land of Grant. Gooberia was rather surprised by this revelation, but he went with it and provided homes for the bees for the time being. The only one that still stands is his community house, before the pirate ship got built. There was a little tree that existed where some of the bees lived, but it was a little too cramped for the bees to live there, so some of them just left for breathing breaks. One day, however, Grant had the idea to build a giant beehive, but he wondered where. The bees thought of building a giant tree, and Grant was pleased greatly. He built a beehive in appreciation, and the bees all swarmed to her new home, and they named it the Hive. Yeah, just the Hive, all capital letters. The hive is an interesting place. There is a tree and the beehives in there for the bees to do general honey work, and some grass for the pollination of flowers. The hive is themed after a beehive for the bees' morale to be up. Up the scaffolding leads to a bedroom, and in this room is Grant's main room. You can see Valentine just vibing in the corner. He doesn't really have a story. His job is to make sure the bees do their jobs and none of them escape. So basically, none of them act stupid. Not that the bees are any level stupid, so Valentine just sits there and just vibes all day. You can see some pretty valuable relics in this room, like a wither skull and the census books. Grant prefers to sleep in the hive solely for the hive aesthetic, though the bees can be a bit loud at night, so sometimes he will sleep in the community house. The hive is also a place for creativity and inspiration, as this is the area where bees have made their plans for RoboGreg, the museum, and even some parts of the Ice Express. Though of course with all good things there are some bad ones in it. We all know of Ben. He is infamous for burning down the tree and the beehive with it. Everything appeared hopeless in this destruction, but thankfully Grant had the ability of bites the dust, and everything went back to normal after a little explosion. But for that moment, the bees felt the greatest pain and suffering felt by anyone. Ever since, the bees hated Ben, and they wanted to get their revenge on him. Someday. However, let's just say a wacky event happened one day. The bees were studying multi-dimensional technology, but suddenly one day, the bees all got sucked into the portal and they all went into hyperspace. Seriously, it was crazy. And for a while, the bees were trying to find their way home, having some pretty typical road trip arguments along the way. However, let's just say they took a wrong turn down Dimension 42, and then they got stuck on a weird red planet. They were like, oh crap, how do we get home? But thankfully, 20th Century Bee and Tubular Bees decided to work together for once to make an emergency transmission to Gooberia. Grant and William were able to hear about what happened, so they were like, oh crap, we gotta help them. So then Grant devised a plan, and that plan was the teleportator and nader, whatever it's called. And what that thing does is somehow teleports the bees back into their location. I don't know how it works, but after days of planning and days of worrying, Grant, 20th Century, and Tubular Bees activated the teleportator and nader somehow. And then after a massive boom, the bees suddenly returned, which is pretty cool, not gonna lie. Now of course, let's just say some bees, like Lucy B, were not very happy to go and travel through hyperspace and be involved in someone's experiment, but 20th Century and Tubular Bees were kinda pleased with themselves knowing that multi-dimensional travel exists somehow. I wonder if that's going to foreshadow something. Oh yeah, about the bees. They all have their own individual stories, big and small. So I think we should begin with 20th Century Bee and Tubular Bees. 20th Century is rather gifted, but awkward and quiet in class. He is in the band ADDB, which is a rather intense rock band. Tubular Bees is rather sociable and rather dislikes 20th Century Bee. He's in the Beatles, where he performs as a pianist. Both went to engineering university together and had a bit of a rivalry. Both believed that they were better than the other. The rumors stated that for a class, they had an engineering competition. Tubular Bee challenged 20th Century Bee to a duel in the same competition. As Grant once stated, engineering duels are intense. It is unknown who won that duel, but we know for certain that Tubular Bee's dad died in the duel and 20th Century almost died himself. The blueprints were destroyed and they refused to remember that moment in history. Both of them have had a great history of hatred between them, though I doubt I would get information out of them since they seemed hostile when I mentioned this moment to them. Honey Joestar has been in the Hive since the beginning, and he is known for being an honorable and determined one. His philosophy is to be polite and be efficient. He wasn't the top of his class in bee school, but he was the most respected and helped out anyone who can. He has a soft spot for pink flowers, so if you ever see him by the Hive, make sure you have some pink flowers on hand, because I think he will appreciate it. According to Grant, Beedum is a really cool guy. He handles the training of the new bees that want to enter the hive and want to make honey for a living. He is a rather tough trainer and one of the older bees in the hive and one of the few with high experience. He trains the newbies hard because he knows that only the most willing and the hardest workers will produce the best honey and overall succeed. There isn't really much known about Wild. He's just kind of there doing his own thing, which kind of scares me because who knows what that guy can do. B4C is a painter and an artist, creating such masterpieces like this. I'm honestly kind of shocked that these aren't in the museum because, you know, these are museum caliber, but Grant's choice and whatever. He doesn't really talk, but whenever he does talk, he's usually performing in his band, ABDB. He and his band plans to perform before the upcoming rocket launch, so you should save the date. You know, like that will ever happen. GoobearSMP is the medic of the bees. He is compassionate but is rather rude to his patients. I guess that's what medical school and debt does to a man. He gets patients and questions from the hive every day, which likely ticks him off. I would say just give the poor man a break for once. Just like hire another medic and, you know, let Gyros rest for like a week. He does enjoy going to Gyropuff's cafe to enjoy a nice dinner with the man himself, but do know that these two are not related. In Silent Wood is a computer scientist who is rather edgy. He has been on the internet for a long time and has seen the rise and fall of YouTubers, games, and websites. He works at the Gooberian Space Center as a server maintenance manager and makes sure that the rockets, space satellites, and all that crap are okay. He flies pretty quickly and takes on bee racing as a hobby to make sure that he doesn't wither away from sitting his ass on the computer all day. If you see a bee flying fast around Gooberia, it's safe to assume that's him. This little riot is a train conductor and engineer who really loves his job and is a general good vibe. I mean, when your whole job is to conduct and manage trains, I think you would be a happy man, but he runs the railroad between Gooberia and Sienna's Manor and Gooberia to Endor and Gooberia to Shrek Swamp. It isn't too busy, but he gets really excited when a visitor rides the rails. He also took a side gig of being a drummer in the Beatles, which will perform before the rocket launches. You know, like that will ever happen. Tomb of the Bloom is an ace pilot who knows how to fly planes. He loves performing stunts in tiny planes to impress the bees and to make his rival, Bloomstarter, feel jealous of him. He wants to ask Grant and the Gooberian Foundation to build an airport so he can fly planes more often, since all he does is just take off from a dingus field, which isn't exactly that flat. Grant and the Gooberian Foundation haven't got back to him since like a few months ago, so he's kinda pissed off at them right now. Boku no Rhythm or Cobra Lily, got it, is a musician known for his high octane intense energy at his concerts. He performs in both the Beatles and in ABDB as the main guitarist. Hosta is an unemployed, lazy, but chill as heck bee. He doesn't do a lot, but he talks to inanimate objects as if they are his friends. He is friends with a goob coin, a piece of sugarcane, and an enduring rock, so like that one SpongeBob scene, but bee form. Stinger Act 1 is a marksman who practices his archery in his free time. His archery skills can match that even of William. He is a charming and flamboyant member of the Hive who he gets calls from female bees on the daily, but when he gets out of control, well, let's just say he can kill the person he's having an argument with in a snap. He is said to have more than 200 confirmed kills, so basically imagine him as Jungali A from JoJo. Steel B Run is a racer, driver, and jockey. He performs at various gigs around the world and he doesn't win most of them, but he is very passionate about racing, so I mean I can't blame him for doing something that he loves. He is very good friends with his racer in crime, Crimesteed, which is pretty cool. Bloomstarter is also an ace pilot who does stunts on the side. He is rather stubborn and has grown a fierce rivalry between his adversary, Tomb of the Bloom. They both had a race once before using their plane. Tomb of the Bloom's plane was manufactured by the Gooberian Heavy Industry Company, and Bloomstarter's was manufactured by the Devonian Metal Company. When the race began, Bloom was able to steal the lead, but his plane exploded due to the unreliability of Devonian engineering. And that moment made him bitter to the Devonians and Tomb of the Bloom, as he believed that if they were both using Gooberian manufactured planes, Bloom would have won. Now, I don't know if that would be true per se, maybe it's just Bloomstarter's a bad pilot, but don't tell him that. Oh, Lonesome Bee is a demolitions expert, and a demo man, if you will. He acts rather civil for his profession, and for some strange reason he has a British accent. He basically does all the demolition work, like, you know, cleaning the mountains so more projects can be built and all that, blah blah blah. But I really should ask these two, you know, Lonesome Bee and Demo Man from Team Fortress 2 if they have been in contact before, because I think they would get along. The Hive is the head farmer of the Hive, and is extremely passionate about his work. He and Beatum both work to train the bees in the process of making honey. When a bee does something wrong, even a little bit, that is enough to make him pissed off and attack. Now, the Hive hasn't attacked any of the bees in a while, but that's just coming from the rumor I've heard of, so either it's very true or it's very false, but I'm not the one to judge. Civil Lavender is the gardener of the Hive. He is the oldest bee in the Hive and is one of the last surviving witnesses of the bees' civil war, as he was an ambulance driver during the war. Many bees ask him for stories of the war, but he prefers not to tell because he had PTSD. He recently took on the hobby of gardening to take his mind off his trauma, and it seems to have done well for him. I mean, look at this garden he made. Scary Flowers is a historian of the Hive and the main bee, him and Grant, of where I got the information to tell the story of the Hive. He is a curious bee who loves to document history of the Hive at any moment. He tries to make good friends with all the bees. Remember the Steel Ball Run 2? He was one of the camera bees in Gooberia. I mean, got this shot, just look at it. Honey Valentine is a general of the bee military who is rather patriotic. Just imagine the patriotism of this guy, but times 10. He is the son of Nectar Valentine, who was the head general of the bees' civil war, who taught his son that a selfless bee is the best bee. He later died while on the front line. That humbled Valentine and gave him motivation to become the new general to Gooberian bees. It is said that William and Devon assassinated him for an unknown reason, but there have been sightings of him in Swagville, but it's unknown if these allegations are correct. Personally, if I have to say something on this, yeah, we might have done something to Valentine, but let's not talk about that story. Bee Breaker is an angry lad with a short temper. He is the one that brews the honey and basically is the lad that makes the honey taste from great to great. He is also an ABDB as the main vocalist, so, you know, good for him. Lucy B is one of the newer bees to have joined the Hive, but she has a lot of accomplishments under the belt. She has become the first female bee president, a queen bee, if you will, of the Hive organization, which is the organization that distributes the honey, sponsorships, does engineering projects, blah blah blah. She is admired by the bees as she literally came from nothing, living in Old Endor before the Great Scott Restoration. After she moved to Gooberia, she worked through the ranks of the bee organization to become the queen bee, so good for her. And finally, there is Fritz von Stingheim. Now, what has Fritz done? Well, he's basically the cyborg bee of the Hive. Yeah, let's just say he got into a pretty bad accident, but thankfully the bees rebuilt him into a super fighting robot. There are more bees that enter the Hive, but they have yet to have their names released because they A, have not chosen to release their names, B, are too young to have them revealed because, you know, child privacy laws, or C, they have yet to finish Hive training, because let's be real, they're kinda bland right now. Either way, at the end of the day, the bees are some pretty cool mad lads that make honey for Gooberia and master their hobbies that make them celebrities, for the most part.